Welcome back. With me today, we've got Sharon Curry, who is Managing Partner, a Trusted Executive Foundation co-chair and a CEO and executive coach. We've also got Ros. I'll get your name exactly right because you've got two names.
Rosanna Williams-Wood.
I'm so grateful that you can come. You're also a co-chair on the foundation board, and we also have you as an expert here as an executive coach. And so thank you for joining us today. Choosing to be consistent in this model, what do you have that from your experience?
For me, being consistent is being consistent to your values. I think everybody gets very tired of me saying walking the talk, whether it's your personal values or your organization values, and being predictable, behaving in a manner that team members can anticipate, creating a stable, secure working environment. Because if you're up 1 minute and down the next, that's not consistency.
I think that's a really important point, Sharon, because it is about that predictability piece. Let's face it, when things aren't predictable and people do behave in a way that we weren't expecting, it often destables us as individuals. And everything that we talk about leadership is also about followership. So we've got to think about how that impacts the people that we follow. And we often talk about having a deep understanding of your own personal values. And some of that enables you to check in with yourself. Are you being consistent to your values? But also understanding that your values are unique and so is somebody else's. And sometimes it is about that management piece of your values and how you communicate, express, inspire others, and how that's going to affect you in some of the tough times as well. I've worked with leaders that have got strong values in, say, community, but they're having to go through a reorganisation. How can you check in with yourself about your values on how you're still going to be consistent to that sense of community whilst having to make, in that particular case, some really tough commercial decisions?
That's a really good point, because we've talked about how some of these leadership behaviours do conflict and how sometimes when you're serving one of those habits, it does impact on another one of those habits. One of the things I'd like to add about consistency is also around if an organisation has got to be consistent in itself, and it can only be consistent if the behaviours within it linked to the values are consistent. And sometimes for my sins, I stay at a Premier Inn, for example, if I'm doing business somewhere. And what I know is that I expect a standard. I get that standard. They're true to their brand. I know that when I go there, exactly what the room will be like and what to expect. And I think our leaders need to be the same, that we can expect and people can behave according to their expectations. If you expect someone to behave in a consistent manner, then you can be secure. And I think that's linked to what you were saying at the top there, Ros, about predictability. But what I want to flag up is when I've tried to teach this piece of work about consistency in behaviour, people often say, but I can't be the same all the time. But it doesn't mean that. It means responding in a situation in a similar way when the situation is the same, because that's linked to fairness. If one person is having troubles at home and they're coming to work late and there's a situation where the manager or the leader flies off the handle, 1 minute, and you were saying, Sharon, about not holding on to that calmness, but the inconsistency another minute is, oh, that's okay, don't worry about it. So we've got to have these standards that come with consistency. But what people sometimes misunderstand is that I must always be this way. But it isn't that. It means behaving in a predictable manner, in line with your values, aligned to the values of the organisation when circumstances are similar. So I think there's a slight area there for confusion.
And I think also that in terms of your emotional response to things that happen, that is really important, because we talk about trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. You could be consistent 364 days of the year, but the one day that you fly off the handle, then that's the day that people are going to remember. So it is really important to try to be consistent in your emotional responses to various events or happenings. The other thing to think about, consistency means reliability. That means fulfilling your promises and commitments on time and meeting expectations. That's a very practical element of what consistency is all about.
That highlights something that when there's arguments around and for and against appraisals, and it takes a big chunk of time around that time of year when people go for their reviews. And at the last minute, somebody might cancel an appraisal when somebody who's going towards that appraisal with their manager have been preparing for it, getting anxious and nervous. But that's an inconsistency. Do we value the appraisal process, but then cancel it at the last minute because something else comes up. Those are the kinds of things that people will remember. Like you say, you're only as good as your last impression. And I've fallen foul of that, even on a personal level with my own family recently. Lost my temper over something, and it's cost me dearly because I wasn't being consistent. I wasn't in control of those emotions at that time when it was quite a sensitive time. So I think this is really important for leaders to bear in mind. If you're going to do some work on yourself, it's becoming aware of self-mastery in those challenging times. Are you able to manage those emotions? There's been quite a bit of talk about red brain, blue brain. Are we being led by what some people remark as the driver or the elephant? There's all these models that people can look at around understanding your own mastery. So that's a really important issue. What can we see happening inside an organisation when consistency as a choice for a behaviour? What does it look like when you're walking around an organisation? What can you see? What can you hear? How does it feel?
I'd like to come back to the pillar of ability. You've spoken about delivery, and that gives people confidence. It gives our business leaders confidence. It gives the markets confidence. It gives the staff confidence. But in that coach piece as well, in terms of for somebody to be able to go out and live their values and their company values, that coach piece can really be very powerful for individuals. And then when they are, let's say, walking the shop floor, the people around them see that and feel it. And it is in that consistency of tone. In my previous life, I've seen certain people that you go, is he in a good mood today? Is today the day that I can tackle this? And that is the flip side of consistency. So yes, we can have emotions and things can come at us as leaders that we need to be agile to. But ultimately, is there a core through that in terms of how we behave? Even if it's a politeness that says, I'd love to talk to you today, but my door is always open unless it's closed. So that people actually know that. And I think the beauty of this 9 habits is it builds, really. So when we move on to integrity, you can see almost how the consistency piece jigsaws into that. We all have this spider sense when it's a bit off. What would you expand on that, Sharon?
Where there's an inconsistent environment, inconsistent atmosphere, there's basically an erosion of what we're trying to aim for, which is trust. So people start to doubt a leader's reliability and, as you say, doubt their integrity. It can cause uncertainty and confusion. If we're inconsistent in our tasking, in our doing, in our behaviors, then that creates confusion and that creates uncertainty, which affects morale. It affects efficiency. People can make mistakes under those environments. Really, basically, a decrease in performance. That can be measured in terms of productivity and engagement. So it's got quite a large impact on the working environment.
It's true. I think when we're thinking about those intangible elements of an organisation, the fact that people can be unpredictable, sometimes that leads to curiosity, that can spark creativity, it can aid learning in some ways. If the unexpected happens, you get something happening in your brain which helps you to learn more effectively. But all of those things are very short term and they're fear-based. And anything that's driven by fear and not love and trust and all of those other really great qualities, it brings out the worst side of those things, not the best side of it. So consistency is really connected to that atmosphere of learning in a way that we've got people who are prepared to speak out. We've got people who can understand the nature of what's going to happen. When they act in a certain way, somebody else might respond in a certain way, and you can feel safe. And ultimately, the work that this model drives for is building trust-based relationships. If somebody's unpredictable, it's incredibly hard to trust them so that you don't know how to behave at your best to get the best in that interaction with them. So consistency is a really great piece of self-discovery that anybody who wants to coach at a high level or wants to be a great effective leader, thinking about your own personal habits, and it's connected to standards. And I know there's a Buddhist phrase, how you do one thing is how you do all things. So, for example, I remember once talking to a group of directors and I was saying about living the values, that was a phrase a coach often uses, and I was talking about honesty, all of those other virtues. And I said, can we have lawbreakers in the organisation? What if somebody's caught shoplifting? Well, and everybody was, oh, that's theft, and quite emotional conversation. And then I took the conversation to the level and I said, what about adultery? I said, if anybody's in this room as a director is found out to be having an affair, how does that impact on consistency of behaviour and other values in the organisation? but did cause a few raised eyebrows. But it's true, isn't it? How you do one thing is how you do all things. So consistency is connected to your personal standards and your personal brand.
When you were talking about the innovation and the creativity aspect, that can be one of your values. You can incorporate being creative and innovative in your organization as a value. Then you can be consistent and proactive in creating space for that. So all organizations need to be innovative. They all need to change. So there's that consistency piece in. We can't stay exactly the same, but we create consistency around opportunity and learning and space in order to be creative. We don't wait for that strange thing that happens or that emergency thing that happens that creates chaos that then creates a lovely, for some people, opportunity for being innovative. That may work for some, but it doesn't work for everybody. And what you have to do is obviously work with everybody in your organization, not just the people who thrive on chaos and inconsistency.
Also, this is linked back to coaching, because in a coaching culture, if you had inconsistent behaviours, a coaching culture would allow for people to be challenged on that. I think consistency is very much connected to fairness. And when you've got high standards and you've got expected behaviours, it's easy to monitor and measure that when you've got a coaching culture and everybody's delivering on the behaviours in the way that we've set out by this clear standard that clearly set those expectations, like a little puzzle that all goes together. Without the consistency, it's hard to get the delivery. Without the coaching, it's hard to get consistency. These things all intertwine. Hopefully people will get a clear picture of what it is to use all of these 9 habits and how they interweave with each other. Any other points that you want to raise about consistency that you think is really important from your experience with working in organisations and helping them develop consistency? What sorts of things have helped them the most?
In my observation, it's always been consistency and communication about where an organisation is going. And to Sharon's point, that can allow to identify where do we need the creative energy, where do we need the innovation, where do we need the strategic piece. That is often the piece that sits at the top of an organisation that is not always communicated terribly well. If I think about the middle managers I've worked with in my career, if I had £1 for every time somebody said, what we need here is better communication. But it's more than that. There's something missing in that consistency. People are capable of reading and listening, but there is usually something missing in the consistency piece. Where are we going? Why are we going in that direction? When might we need to be agile? And moving through that in that consistency, as well as in our own individual behaviours.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it's easier to build relationships when they're relying on trust-based interactions. And all of these things are connected. Most things fall down through poor communication and a breakdown in a relationship. And when you look back, when somebody's had an uncontrolled explosion of emotion, you get a breakdown in a relationship and the communication is very poor. So we've gone round in a big loop there on how these things are all connected. Have you got any other observations around what you've seen, Sharon, in terms of helping organisations become better at these behaviours of consistency?
Feedback is the breakfast of champions. Getting feedback, giving feedback that's regular and clearly communicated, and having a culture of feedback as well, a culture that is open-minded and you're able to give feedback without giving offense. You can imagine somebody blowing up and it's not living to the values, that it's out of character and inconsistent. Then you're not going to dismiss that person immediately from your trusted group of individuals. You might have a conversation though. You might invite them to talk about it, what's going on. That's the human thing to do. As with all these habits, you have to create an environment where consistency can flourish. And that's an environment where you talk about it. You say, what does that look like here? And how are we going to deal with things that might take us off track? What will we do? They're all tied together. It's one of those habits that can create an environment that is untrustworthy if you don't have that consistency.
What gets in the way of people being able to be consistent?
I think complexity, change, pressure to adapt, personal biases as well, emotions. All of those things get in the way of creating a consistent environment. But bring them out in the open, use that coaching habit, create a safe environment, and when inconsistencies happen, learn from them.
Getting that consistency piece in getting real-time quality feedback as a loop for all of us, I think we need to develop that don't think it comes naturally. It certainly hasn't in the organisations I've been in. That could be the environments I've worked in and the type of clients I've worked with. But have you seen any examples of good feedback loops?
I think in those organisations that have done well in creating a great environment of psychological safety, then that feedback is regular and planned and consistent. But I've also seen as many examples where, no, it's just a thought that comes along or we should give some feedback. So it's just one of those things. I've seen both, to be honest.
Yeah. We'd probably all agree it's rooted in psychological safety.
It's so important to build trust. You can't have psychological safety if there is no trust there. So this is a big loop that we've been round in. And it's great to explore these habits with you. Thank you to my lovely speakers, Sharon and Roz. And all of this has been quite a challenge, but I'm glad we're doing it because I think it's getting the words out there and we're making people aware of what the work does at the Trusted Executive. Thanks ever so much, and I'll see you next time.